wanna feel it.
Holy shit, we just cleared that entire room. Dude, her clear is just crazy. Yo guys, what is up? Max on our first Descendant video, and today we're going over my full build guide for Ines. If you did not know, Ines just dropped. She is the most recent Descendant, and she is an absolute monster when it comes to mobbing. I think she's probably instantly one of the best like mobbing Descendants in the game. And then she's got some interesting things going on with bossing and like tank builds. I'm gonna break down everything that you guys need to know. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let's get right into it. So because Ines is like a brand new character, we're gonna do a full breakdown of her kit and her Transcendent modules, and then we'll get into like the actual builds. So to start us off, her first ability is called Chain Lightning. Basically what this does is it bounces a projectile off of enemies. If there's not enough enemies to bounce off of, it'll bounce towards the enemy and then towards you and then back to the enemy. So this does kind of work for single target damage, and you can get increased bounces based off of your range. So if you add increased range, you can actually get more bounces out of this projectile. This projectile works really well because you don't actually need to be aiming or directly even looking at what you're clicking. When it goes out, it'll go out and just seek enemies and hit any enemies that are in the area. And this ability applies Conductor. Now, Conductor is a pretty interesting part of her kit. Anytime an enemy has Conductor on them, that enemy will take additional damage from any other ability that's hitting that enemy, and the additional damage is based off of the ability that's going to be hitting that enemies that have Conductor, and every single one of our abilities can apply Conductor. So speaking of like combos with Conductor, her second ability is called Lightning Conductor, which create current coils on nearby enemies to deal damage. These current coils on enemies, or creates current coils on all enemies with Conductor to deal damage, inflicts Conductor on those hit when attacking enemies with Conductor, deal increased damage. So basically, you're going to get all of these coils on enemies that deal a bunch of damage. As you can see, the target count increases with range. These are one of those kind of things that the more range that you have, the more targets you can hit. And this will do a 100% additional damage against enemies if they already have that Conductor afflicted. So typically your like skill order is going to be using your first ability and then your second ability, so that you apply the Conductors to all of them. And then your 2 is kind of your combo burst with that to deal additional damage. Next up is her third ability. This is an ability that massively changes with her Transcendent modules, which we'll talk about later. But basically, you charge up this thrust, and if you release it at a perfect window, right when it blinks, you're going to do a big attack that does a ton of damage. This hits as many enemies as it can, basically within your range. It doesn't seem like it has any sort of target max, so it's not only good for like single targets and hitting like elites for tons of damage, but you can also like clear a room with it, which is really, really awesome. This once again inflicts Conductor. However, if an enemy is already inflicted with Conductor, it gets an additional 900% damage, which is crazy. This does 3,684 skill damage, and if you time it perfectly, you get an 100% damage increase with it. So this ability will like pop multiple millions even before you even get a full build on her. It is very, very powerful. However, this is the first ability in her entire kit that actually costs Plasma. Now, Plasma is a resource cost that is unique to her, that can be generated by using her first and second ability. Anytime that you apply Conductor to an enemy, or anytime you hit an enemy with your abilities, you get Conductor, or you get Plasma, and then you can spend Plasma on your third and fourth ability. Generating Plasma is incredibly easy when you're mobbing. However, it's pretty difficult for bossing, which we'll talk about when we get to that. And then lastly, her fourth ability is called Snare Hunter, which throws a plasma acceleration coil that creates Thunder Snare. And then when you're using this skill, you get Short Circuit. So this is a skill that does a big AoE. It does continuous damage to enemies that are in the radius. The projectile itself will deal damage, but you also get Short Circuit as a buff to give yourself 50% movement speed increase, which is pretty crazy. And then the coils that it calls down will also deal a bunch of damage. So it's doing continual damage in the radius, but it's also sending out lightning bolts that are going to be doing a bunch of damage. This is a pretty big damage ability, not quite as big as her third, but you can have multiple of these up. Even though it says max stacks of 2, if you have enough cooldown or duration, you can get multiple of these up, and then you can cover an entire battlefield with them. And then lastly, her passive is called Plasma Oscillation. This is one of the more interesting passives in the game, as it scales off of her max MP. So she gets increased critical hit rate based off of her max MP times 6.5. As far as I can tell, this is just straight up added MP. On skill critical hit rates, when you crit an enemy, you can heal and you can recover your MP, and you also trigger Dark Currents. You get a 100% chance to trigger Dark Currents whenever you crit with your skill, but only a 10% when you trigger with a weapon. So definitely really good at triggering these Dark Currents with your skills, especially because she can get 100% crit chance. But these Dark Currents are like another little buff on enemies that will deal a pretty sizable amount of damage. Dark Currents get your max MP times your damage multiplier times your min damage rate minus your max damage rate, which looks confusing. But to break it down, your damage multiplier is your skill critical hit rate times 46, and your min damage rate is your max MP divided by 12. And then, so what this basically translates to is max MP is really important to get this to deal a bunch of damage, because it's your max MP times your damage multiplier. Your damage multiplier is your skill critical hit rate, which is impacted by your max MP. And then it's times your min damage rate, which is also impacted by your max MP. So if you're building max MP, you're basically multiplying your damage over with this. And I was getting around a like 50 to 60% increase of damage on Dark Currents if I was using MP mods or not. And then this can hit up to 3 monsters. And these things can kind of re-trigger these Dark Currents. One thing that's cool about them is this line that says killing enemies with conductor or the effect expiring still triggers Dark Current. So even if you're not killing an enemy, if they have a conductor on them and they die, or the effect expires, it can trigger Dark Current, and then Dark Current can trigger more damage on enemies. So you've got kind of this like infinite loop that can kind of happen with her, which we'll show in a second. But that is a breakdown of her skills. So now we're going to talk about builds. And one of the important keys that we really need to highlight when we go over builds is the question of how impactful is max MP on her. Do we actually need to build into max MP? Is it actually valuable to us? And in my opinion, max MP is actually pretty good on her. So for example, this is, just I put on 3 crit mods. I've got skill concentration, emergency measures, and frontline on. So we're not using currently skill insight, which is, a whole bunch of crit chance, but no damage from this. If we put on a single MP mod, for example, we put on enlightenment, that's another 15% of our max MP, and we have max MP on our sensors, so we're getting a bunch. We're also level 40, so we get a bunch more MP, but we were just at 85%. Putting on 1 MP roll got us to 93%. And then if we put on another MP mod, shield conversion is a pretty cool one. This gives us another 15%. So we're netting out 30% more MP. And now you'll see that we are crit capped. So without skill insight, we can get to 100% critical hit chance on her. She scales really well with crit because now we have a 100% crit rate with a 5 times crit damage multiplier on her. And so this is kind of what I've been running on her main build. Technically, you could use like skill insight instead of these 2 mana things and get 100% crit rate pretty easily. However, we can go for the 3 crit damage modules. And then once again, from my testing, putting on like 2 max MP rolls gives her about 50 to 60% more damage from her hits with her Dark Currents, which are literally getting applied all the time to enemies. So it's a sizable damage increase and it gets us crit chance. And so we are going to be using MP on her. I don't think it is 100% necessary, but I do think it makes her unique to build, and so it's kind of what I wanted to focus on. So we've got a lot of MP on her. We're going to build her main build, a ton of crit, and then let's talk about the rest of the things here. Without this, we go from 3,752 burst damage to 3,684 with a max damage increase, but we have no pierce damage. The big difference is you get the damage multiplier. If enemies are inflicted with conductor, this is cut in half. But I found the damage to still be like really good with both. And so basically, this just nets us out a whole bunch of extra damage, and we get to scale it with tech. So this is the Transcendent module that we're using on the build. So we've kind of gone over that MP is worth using, and that crit is definitely worth using. 5 times damage 100% of the time is disgusting. Now let's put in the rest of our mods. So we are going to keep her alive with some HP. She definitely needs some survivability, and she seems to work better with HP, especially because we're going to be using shield conversion, which reduces our max shield, so we're really not going to have any shield at all. We do need cooldown. Now, I specifically am just using nimble fingers. You could opt for MP conversion, but if you put this on with this setup, you no longer get to 100% crit chance because you lose 15% max MP, and the cooldowns on her honestly feel really fine with nimble fingers. Plus the next 2 mods that we're going to be using, because we're going crit, we can go for 2 focus mods. Because all of our abilities are going to be on tech, we can go for a focus on electric and a focus on tech. And that leaves our last mod to round out the build, which we're going to be using skill expansion. Skill expansion gives us a bunch more range, but it also gives us more enemies that can get hit with the bounces, which is just a direct damage increase for us, and more targets that can get hit with her like second ability. So range is really great, and range is very, very noticeable on the 4th ability with the amount of enemies that you can get into the circle, especially when you have like 2 up, you know, like that is a lot of area coverage that is of enemies that are going to be taking a ton of damage. And as you can see, like we already have an extra stack of our 4th backup, even without MP conservation. So I really don't think she needs the extra cooldown mod. All right, now to talk about bossing on Ines. Now, Ines has a bit of a weird issue with bossing, but she's like still technically can be pretty good at it. Basically, her weird thing that she's got going on is whenever she hits an enemy with one of her abilities, she applies conductor to them, which gives you a plasma charge amount. And unfortunately, whenever you're hitting an enemy multiple times that already has conductor on it, you don't gain any more plasma. And so when you're bossing on Ines, right now you just can't get up the ability to use like any of your other abilities, which is weird. Like you're like maybe going to be able to get off like 1/3 ability and basically 0 4th abilities unless you like really spec into cost reduction, which reduces the amount of plasma needed. And I actually spec'd that originally, and we like put a bunch of cost reduction so she could use her 3rd and 4th abilities, but it was still like so small uptime of them that it just didn't seem to make all that much sense. So currently on her bossing setup, we've just fully sent it into basically the ability to spam her 1, which does decent damage. But the big thing about her 1 is its ability to chain back and forth between you and a boss. If you keep a like relatively close distance, like I'd say medium distance to a boss, you can have your like ability bounce back and forth a ton of times. And if you keep that distance, you can do a lot of damage with her. She's got inherent like MP recovery whenever you're critting, and we can get her to have a ton of like crit amount, which allows her to sustain like mana spam on bosses, which is actually pretty potent. So this is the build that I was rocking for our like defiler kill. The big changes are that we aren't going to go mana, which means we do need skill insight to get up our crit chance. We can go for extra cooldown so that we are able to spam the 1 more. I don't really even hit the 2. If you saw me using the 2 at the beginning of the fight, I was mainly clicking the 2. While this is good damage, you know, the 1 spam is really good. I was mainly clicking the 2 just to get our stacks of Secret Garden up for Defiler. And then here, this last mod, I had Dangerous Ambush. I don't have her fully catalyzed. I just wanted to get her skill effect range fully maxed so we could, you know, keep as far away as possible, but still get the bounces. Make sure that she's got like her full range so that we get the most bounces out of our projectiles. You could technically put HP here, or like amplification control, anything that just like peaks her range so you get the most bounces. But you know, for example, like Dangerous Ambush is good on Defiler, but it doesn't have like the greatest uptime. So if you're feeling squishy, you can put HP here, and then go like an extra range mod here. But yeah, that is the bossing setup. And the last setup to talk about on her is her tank setup with Plasma Ball. Now, kind of need to explain how this works to understand why this makes her, like, this is one of her crazier mods. And I have, like, kind of a weird setup, so we'll talk about the tank build. And specifically, because I don't have, like, a ton of catalysts on her, there's some things that you could do to, like, make her really, really solid with this. But basically, Plasma Ball is her other Transcendent module. By the way, both Transcendent modules you can farm from Obstructor and Frostwalker. But this allows her to generate a Plasma Ball around her. She removes all of her like skill crit scaling from MP, so you don't get much crit on her when you put this on. However, every basically on our current build, 6.5 seconds, you generate a Plasma Ball. And this Plasma Ball, while it's active on you, gives you 100% well, you just can't take damage. Like, you are immune to damage. Your Plasma Ball becomes your source of survivability, and it gains 100% of your attribute res, 100% of your defense, and it gets your HP times your max MP divided by 6.1% for its HP. Basically, while this is up, you can just sit in the hardest damage in the game and not take any hits. Like, you are just immune to damage while the Plasma Ball is up, which is crazy because you can literally face tank any attack, anything in the entire game. And the new activity that just came out, the Void Erosion, is pretty difficult. Things are doing a bunch of damage. And we can get a setup on her where basically she's immune to damage for like 60 seconds with a like 12-second cooldown. And so there's some really, really crazy things. You can get this cooldown lower, as you just saw, but you can become incredibly tanky. You lose some of your skill crit rate, but you can also build enough damage that you can still kill things and also be unkillable. I think this is going to be really helpful for pushing higher tiers of Void Erosion, but let's kind of go through some of the modules. So for the Plasma Ball build, right now the modules that are in are basically what I would consider pretty essential mods, and then you could build her out however you want. For example, like, you could do skill damage and still use her as a like caster ability descended to kill things, but you could also go like full like shot focus gun damage and just use like, you know, the strongest guns in the game, like the Enduring Legacy and the Thunder Cage, to just do mobbing with your guns on her and not really worry about her abilities. But there are a few things that I think you really want. First off, this scales off of your HP, so getting a ton of HP is super important. So I've got increased HP and HP amplification for a ton of extra HP. This doesn't get any attributes from your shield, so your shield does not matter. We're also going to want a lot of cooldown so that we can get the ball to the lowest cooldown possible. And so we're going to be using Nimble Fingers, which gives us cooldown and MP conversion. Obviously, you don't want less MP, you want more MP, so we can offset the MP conversion with shield conversion, which gives us the plus 15% max MP, and then minus 73 max shield. Technically, you could just use the like other MP thing with no downside. Enlightenment. That works as well, but basically offset MP conversion with mana. This is also going to give your orb more survivability, which is great. It does get 100% of your defense, so you know you can run a defense mod to get a bunch of survivability there. And then the rest of the mods are like entirely up to you. For example, I do think it is pretty important to run 2 focus mods, because, you know, right now it's only on a 20-second cooldown. If we run 2 focus mods and go for some like damage stuff, we can get it lower. So like, let's say we put in a focus on electric, and then you could go singular or tech, kind of whatever you're feeling. Let's say we go for singular because we're doing mobbing. We'll use the 1, and we'll use let's go tech. So we could go focus on electric and tech. That now gets our cooldown down to 12 seconds, which is incredible. And then the last mods, you could go for even more damage. You could technically still go like a skill insight and a skill crit. Those would work technically. You could go for like, you know, if you wanted to go for more guns, you could go for shot focus. You could go for even more survivability with like HP collector if you wanted to. You could even do some weird things with this. Well, never mind. showing on screen is kind of like my suggested setup that gives you kind of a little bit of everything, but definitely you could like specialize this into like full abilities or full guns and so on and so forth. But yeah, that is her tank build. Now let's go over like weapons, reactors, and external components. So by far and away, in my opinion, her best weapon is the Secret Garden, especially with her Transcendent module that turns all of her abilities into tech. If you're using the Secret Garden, you simply proc pest control a ton. She doesn't have a dimension skill, so you can't get like custom resource back, which would have been cool. But pest control is going to give us more firearm attack and, more importantly, skill power. This is a massive damage increase for her ability damage, which we want a ton of ability damage on her. If you're going for theme, other two cool weapons are the Executor, obviously like an electric shotgun that pumps damage, and the Thunder Cage, also an electric SMG that can do a lot of AoE. So these are kind of like cool thematic weapons, but like 99% of the time, I'd really recommend holding the Secret Garden. It's just going to buff up your damage a ton. Her best in slot reactor looks something like this. I actually just had this in my bank. I didn't like prep or farm beforehand. I just had this laying around. Got really lucky with that. But you're going to want a tactical rifle mounted electric tech reactor. I think electric tech is definitely the way to go for her for like the most of her builds. And if you can get cooldown, that's really great. The reason cooldown is really nice is because of her like whole mana thing, we're not going to really want to use MP conversion, so we're going to have less cooldown than we normally would without it, and cooldown helps offset that. And then crit damage, I think, is a no-brainer because she gets to 100% crit rate very easily. That the crit damage increase is massive. That's part of what's allowing us to get to like 5 times crit damage. So this is my ideal reactor. Obviously for bossing, you'd probably want crit damage to Colossus, but I don't think like bossing is really her specialty, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. When it comes to her external components, there's not a lot of things that are super great for her. I'm currently just using what I normally use, which is 2-piece Annihilation set for some extra duration, and the Invader set for some extra shield. These just roll all big HP rolls. My Annihilation technically doesn't have HP, but it's got the best like MP roll, MP recovery in combat that I have, so it's a trade-off. There are a few interesting like component set if you really wanted to get into it. So for her, one set that I think would be interesting is the Hunter set. Only thing is the Hunter set only has like 1 piece that has HP, so you could get this cooldown, but other than that, like nothing else really benefits us. Hunter brings a bunch of MP recovery, but I promise you MP is not an issue on her. She gets MP back whenever she crits, so like MP's recovery is not important. Technically, the only other set that I really would recommend on her is probably the Supernova 2-piece, but once again, you're sacrificing some survivability there. But Supernova 2-piece could technically work, and there's not really much else that I would go for. You could technically go for like full Invader set for some extra tech skill power modifier, which would be interesting. Once again, I just prioritizing some survivability, but yeah, the Invader set is another like set that could be potentially interesting on her. All right, guys, that is going to do it for the video. I know this was a bit of a longer one. I wanted to do a full breakdown on Ines and kind of talk about some different options that you have for builds on her. I do think that this is probably one of the best Descendants that we've gotten in the game in terms of like just how flashy all of her abilities are, and how fun she is to play. I honestly, I do think, you know, she's definitely not as good of a bosser as Haley, but I do think she's got a lot cooler like interactions and things going on. So yeah, guys, that is going to do it for the video. I definitely would recommend building her out. She's awesome. And I will catch y'all in the next one, guys. Take care. Bye.